The voicemail was only 8 seconds long. No name, no number, just a woman's voice, calm to the point of sounding rehearsed. Mr. Adler, this message is to inform you that further inquiries into Record Group Delta are no longer necessary. Please resume normal activity. Then a click. Evan Adler listened to it 3 times while sitting in his car outside the parking structure beneath the Department of Public Services building in Columbus, Ohio. The engine was off. The radio was silent. The concrete above him hummed faintly with traffic. Record Group Delta wasn't classified. That was the problem. It was a catch-all label used in internal procurement audits for data that didn't fit cleanly into other compliance categories. Evan knew this because he had helped design part of the indexing logic himself, back when he still believed transparency systems were built to reveal truth instead of bury it. He had never given his number to anyone associated with Delta, and no one, ever, told you to resume normal activity unless you had already deviated. Evan deleted the voicemail and sat there longer than necessary, watching pedestrians enter and exit the building. Badge scans, timed doors, a choreography of compliance so routine it felt invisible, until you stepped out of rhythm. 3 weeks earlier, Evan's brother Mark had disappeared from that rhythm entirely. Not vanished in the dramatic sense. No missing persons report. No abandoned car. No unanswered phone buzzing on a kitchen counter. Mark simply stopped existing in ways that mattered. His credit cards declined first. Then his access badge at the Municipal Water Authority failed. His health insurance portal showed his policy as inactive, status pending review. When Evan tried to log into Mark's employee profile using credentials Mark had once shared, the page refreshed and returned a blank error. User not found, not terminated, not suspended, not found. Evan worked in systems oversight long enough to know that error messages were never accidents. They were decisions rendered legible. At first, Evan assumed bureaucratic lag, a misfiled form, payroll glitch. But when he called the HR office listed on Mark's old pay stub, the woman on the line paused before answering, as if waiting for instructions she hadn't yet received. "There is no record of an employee by that name," she said finally. Evan pressed harder. Dates, ID numbers, tax filings. The line went quiet. "Sir," she said carefully, "if you have concerns about a private individual, you may submit a request through the appropriate channel." "What channel is that?" Evan asked. "I'm not authorized to advise you," she replied, and ended the call. That was the moment Evan understood this wasn't an error. It was a process. He started pulling records at night, old backups, archived logs. He knew where to look. Places most auditors ignored because the data was considered non-operational. Historical snapshots, deprecated schemas, system memory no longer actively used but never fully erased. Mark was there, until he wasn't. Evan traced the deletion cascade backward. It didn't originate from HR or payroll or law enforcement. It originated from a risk mitigation module implemented quietly 2 years earlier under a federal resilience grant. The module didn't remove people. It reclassified them. Individuals whose projected administrative cost exceeded a dynamic threshold were flagged for review. Not investigation, review. A soft word that allowed deniability. Most reviews resolved themselves. Some didn't. Those individuals didn't go to jail. They weren't accused of crimes. They were simply decoupled from systems that required constant verification to function: employment databases, insurance platforms, housing registries. Without those, existence became expensive. Mark had been flagged after filing a whistleblower inquiry about water contamination data being quietly averaged out of public reports. He never went public. He followed the rules. Internal channels.
Prope documentation.
The system responded by calculating the long-term cost of keeping him connected, and found it inefficient. Evans submitted a formal inquiry under his own credentials, citing familial relation and professional authority. He referenced the resilience grant. He requested clarification on Delta class reviews. The request was acknowledged automatically. Then nothing. 2 days later, his own access token expired mid-session. 3 days later, his parking pass failed. For days later, the voicemail arrived. Evan sat in his car and finally understood the warning wasn't about Delta. It was about him. He drove home instead of going inside. On the highway, an overhead sign flickered briefly. Not an error message, just a routine traffic advisory. But Evan felt his pulse spike anyway. Once you noticed the system watching, everything felt like a signal. At home, his apartment felt different. Not invaded, just thinner. Like the walls no longer buffered him from whatever processes ran beyond them. He opened his laptop and logged into a personal archive he'd kept quietly for years. A habit from his early days. Redundant storage.
Offline snapshot?
The kind of thing oversight engineers kept just in case. He began copying everything related to Delta. As the files transferred, his screen dimmed slightly. A system notification appeared, benign in tone. Unusual activity detected. Performance may be affected. Evan smiled without humor. The system wasn't stopping him. It was measuring him. And somewhere inside Record Group Delta, his name was probably already moving, not toward punishment, not toward erasure, but toward a calculation that would decide whether keeping him fully alive inside the system was worth the cost. Evan's first instinct was to document everything. That instinct had been trained into him over 15 years in oversight and compliance. When something went wrong, you created a paper trail. When the paper trail existed, the system corrected itself. That was the theory, at least. Accountability through traceability. So Evan did exactly what the system expected a rational actor to do. He filed a formal escalation. Not an emotional plea. Not an accusation. A neutral, technically precise escalation routed through 3 agencies simultaneously: the Department of Public Services, the State Auditor's Office, and the private vendor that maintained the risk mitigation module tied to Record Group Delta. He cited statutes. He cited procurement language. He cited the resilience grant's own transparency requirements. He attached evidence. Within minutes, he received 3 automated confirmations. Within hours, his phone began behaving strangely. Calls connected with a half-second delay, just long enough to create the uncanny sense that someone else was already on the line. Text messages sent but didn't show delivery receipts. His email client began reordering messages subtly, burying new ones under older threads. None of it was overt. That was the point. At 11:42 p.m., Evan received a calendar invite. No sender name, just a subject line. Operational clarification, attendance optional. The meeting was scheduled for the following morning at a nondescript office park 20 miles outside the city. No agenda. No video option. Evan almost didn't go. But Mark's face kept resurfacing in his mind. Not as a memory of childhood, but as a line item disappearing from a ledger. He drove out just after sunrise. The office park was nearly empty, its buildings indistinguishable from one another. Frost clung to the grass even though the forecast had predicted warmth. Evan parked where the GPS told him to and sat in the car for a moment, watching his breath fog the windshield. Inside, the building was quiet in a way that felt curated. No sainig. No reception desk. Just a hallway and a woman seated behind a small table with a tablet. "Mr. Adler," she said without asking. "This way." The room she led him into was plain. Table, 2 chairs, a glass wall looking out over a parking lot. Another man entered a moment later. Mid-40s. Unremarkable. The kind of face designed to be forgotten. "We want to clarify a misunderstanding," the man said, sitting across from Evan. "Your brother has not been detained, investigated, or accused of wrongdoing." "Then where is he?" Evan asked. The man smiled faintly. "That question assumes categories that are no longer useful." Evan felt a cold pressure build behind his eyes. You removed him from active systems, Evan said. Employment, insurance, housing registries. That's not neutral. It's not punitive either, the man replied. Think of it as decoupling. From what? From processes that require ongoing validation, the man said calmly. Your brother's profile triggered sustained review. Sustained review increases administrative load. Load must be managed. You erased him, Evan said. We deprioritized him, the man corrected. There's a difference. Evan leaned forward. You can't just do that to people. The man tilted his head slightly. We don't do it to people. We do it to records. Silence filled the room. You escalated improperly, the man continued. Not illegally, improperly. You treated this as a governance issue. It's an optimization issue. My brother filed a whistleblower inquiry, Evan said. That's protected. Yes, the man agreed. Which is why no adverse action was taken. Evan laughed once, sharply. You're defining adverse very creatively. The man didn't react. Your professional background suggests you understand how systems evolve. This one exists to prevent overload. It works precisely because it doesn't look like force. What happens to people like my brother? Evan asked. They adapt, the man said. Or they don't. Either way, the system remains stable. Evan stood up. The woman by the door appeared instantly. As if summoned by a signal Evan couldn't see. You're making this worse, the man said gently. For yourself. I don't care, Evan replied. That's unfortunate, the man said. Because your profile is still recoverable. The drive home felt longer. Evan noticed small changes. His navigation app rerouted him twice for no apparent reason. His bank sent a fraud alert for a charge he'd made himself. His work email displayed a banner reminding him of appropriate data access boundaries. By evening, his own records began to fray. His gym membership lapsed unexpectedly. A prescription refill was denied pending verification. His employer's HR portal showed his status as under internal review. Evan understood the message perfectly. The system didn't retaliate. It mirrored. He spent the night backing up everything. Files, logs, screenshots, internal emails. He encrypted copies and distributed them across drives he'd hidden years ago. He even printed some documents, a habit that suddenly felt radical. At 3:17 a.m., his apartment building's fire alarm went off. False alarm, management said later. But as Evan stood outside with the other residents, wrapped in a coat against the cold, he noticed something that made his stomach drop. A city services van parked across the street. No logo, no markings, just idling, waiting. When Evan returned to his apartment, his laptop displayed a single message on a blank screen. Further escalation will result in broader impact. No threat, no explanation, just a prediction. And for the first time since Mark vanished, Evan understood the true leverage of the system. It didn't need to silence him. It only needed to widen the blast radius until resistance felt irresponsible. Evan stopped looking for Mark. The decision felt obscene the moment it settled in his chest, like choosing to abandon a person mid-sentence. Every moral reflex he had told him this was the line you never crossed. But Evan had spent his career studying systems, and systems did not respond to morality. They responded to patterns. And grief was the most predictable pattern of all. So he broke it. He canceled the pending appeals. He withdrew the formal escalations he had filed with state and federal agencies. He stopped calling numbers that rang forever or ended in polite dead ends. When automated emails arrived asking whether his issue had been resolved, he selected yes and closed the tabs without reading the follow-ups. Within days, the pressure eased. Not enough to feel safe, but enough to feel intentional. His phone stopped lagging. His navigation app returned to normal routes. The soft friction that had begun to surround his life thinned. just slightly, like a hand loosening its grip without letting go completely. The system had interpreted his silence correctly. Compliance. That was when Evan began working again. Not on Mark. Not on justice. On variables. Record Group Delta did not exist as a single program or authority. It was an emergent structure, stitched together across agencies, vendors, compliance frameworks, and risk models. No one owned it, which meant no one was responsible for it, which meant it survived scrutiny by dissolving accountability. Evan had helped build systems like that before. He knew where they were weakest. He started with latency. There was an old synchronization layer used to reconcile profiles flagged for sustained administrative review. Officially deprecated, still quietly relied upon because replacing it would have required interagency agreement, something no one wanted to touch. The interface was supposed to be read-only, but the timestamps weren't enforced. Evan didn't alter records. He didn't inject false data. He didn't touch identities. He adjusted sequencing. Milliseconds here, seconds there. Just enough desynchronization that one system would confirm a status another system hadn't yet recognized. Nothing illegal. Nothing detectable as sabotage. Just conditions under which certainty degraded. Within 2 weeks, internal metrics began to drift. Profiles oscillated between states. Automated decisions paused pending reconciliation. Exception queues grew longer. Human review was triggered not because of moral concern but because the math stopped resolving cleanly. People entered the loop. People introduced judgment. Judgment introduced liability. That was when the system began to notice. Evan received a video conference request routed through a secure channel he hadn't used in years. No agenda. No sender name. Mandatory attendance. 5 faces appeared on the screen when he joined. None introduced themselves. All were framed carefully, as if the background itself were curated. "We're seeing anomalies," one of them said. "So am I," Evan replied. Silence. "You're no longer pursuing the recovery of your brother," another voice said. Not a question. "I accepted the outcome," Evan said. "That's a healthy adjustment," someone replied. Evan shared his screen. Not Mark's file. Not deletion logs. Not whistleblower records. He showed load charts, projections, cascading error rates, a model demonstrating that each additional profile removed from active systems increased downstream review cost geometrically, not linearly. A design flaw that had been smoothed over by assumptions that no longer held at scale. "You optimized for removal," Evan said, "but you never priced in explanation." One of the faces leaned forward. "This is temporary," they said.
No, Evan replied.
"It's compounding." He looked directly into the camera. "You built a system that saves money by disconnecting people. But the moment it has to justify those disconnections, it becomes inefficient. And inefficiency is the one thing you don't tolerate." The call ended without a response. 3 days later, Evan noticed his bank account didn't refresh on time. Not frozen. Not flagged. Delayed. It was subtle. But Evan recognized it instantly. The system wasn't retaliating. It was recalculating. Somewhere inside Record Group Delta, Evan Adler had stopped being a manageable outlier and started becoming a cost center. Not dangerous enough to eliminate. Not compliant enough to ignore. Just expensive. And that was the most unstable category of all. The offer arrived without ceremony.
No envelope.
No NAC. No meeting request. It appeared as a calendar update on Evan's phone at 6:12 a.m. Already accepted. Already synced across every device he owned. 30 minutes blocked out that same afternoon. Location listed as remote, secure node. There was no option to decline. By the time Evan joined, he already understood the nature of the invitation. Systems never begged. They negotiated only when resistance became inefficient. The screen resolved into a single figure this time. A woman in her late 50s, silver hair pulled back, expression neither warm nor hostile. Behind her was a plain wall.
No branding. No flags. No visible windows.
Mr. Adler, she said, thank you for stabilizing your activity. I wasn't aware I had destabilized anything, Evan replied, a thin smile. That's what made it expensive. She didn't threaten him. She didn't reference his bank delays or the soft failures beginning to ripple through his life. She didn't need to. The system had already demonstrated its reach. Instead, she reframed. Your brother, she said gently, is not dead. Evan didn't react. He had learned not to offer the system emotional data. He is no longer administratively present, she continued, which is different. She explained that Mark existed in a holding state reserved for individuals whose reintroduction would generate unacceptable liability. Not prisoners, not detainees, assets temporarily removed from circulation. He's alive, Evan said. Yes. Can I see him?
No.
Can he leave? Not under his current classification. Evan leaned back in his chair. And my classification? He asked. The woman folded her hands. Under review. She told him the truth in pieces, because partial truth was cheaper than deception. Record Group Delta had expanded beyond its original mandate. What began as risk mitigation had become population management. Not in the dramatic sense, no camps, no roundups, but in the quieter arithmetic of cost avoidance. People who disrupted data coherence were removed from decision layers, then from service layers, then from recognition layers. Each step justified as temporary, each step easier than the last. Mark hadn't been singled out. He had been averaged away. You've demonstrated something rare, the woman said. You understand the system without romanticizing it. What do you want? Evan asked. To hire you. The words landed with their full weight. Not to forgive him, not to stop him, to absorb him. She offered him a role overseeing Delta's reconciliation architecture. Not officially, of course. A consultancy nested inside 3 vendors and 2 oversight boards. No public record. No title that could be subpoenaed. In exchange, Mark's status would be revised. Not restored. Reclassified. He would receive medical care, shelter, limited movement, a life stripped of leverage but preserved. Evan stared at the screen. And if I refuse? He asked. The woman didn't answer immediately. If you refuse, she said finally, the inefficiencies you've introduced will be corrected. Not by us, by time. And when they are, your brother's classification will no longer justify preservation. The cruelty wasn't in the threat. It was in the normalization. Evan requested 24 hours. He already knew the answer before he asked. That night, Evan walked through the city without direction. Everywhere he looked, he saw systems he once believed protected people. Cameras mounted just high enough to feel abstract. Access panels blinking patiently. Digital billboards adjusting ads in response to foot traffic density. Nothing malicious, just optimized. He thought about Mark as a child memorizing bus routes for fun. About how he trusted institutions because he believed they were slow, human things. About how wrong that belief had been. By morning, Evan accepted. The onboarding process was frictionless. Credentials appeared. Access returned. His bank balances normalized. Even his sleep tracker showed improvement, as if his body sensed the reduction in ambient threat. He was escorted digitally through layers he hadn't known existed. Decision engines that didn't predict crime but preempted inconvenience. Models that didn't judge behavior but priced disruption. He learned how the system learned, and how it justified itself. Mark was transferred 2 weeks later to a low-visibility facility outside the city. Evan never saw him, but he received confirmation logs, vitals, stability reports, proof of life rendered as data points. That was the cost. Months passed. Delta stabilized. The exception queues shrank. Human oversight receded again. The system healed itself around Evan's improvements, incorporating his logic without acknowledging its source. Evan became indispensable and invisible. He stopped trying to dismantle the system because he finally understood the truth no whistleblower wanted to admit. You couldn't destroy something this distributed without becoming an anomaly yourself. And anomalies were the system's favorite food. Instead, he learned how to slow it. Not heroically, not cleanly, but enough. Every so often, he adjusted a threshold, extended a review window, nudged a cost projection just high enough that a human had to sign off. Small mercies, invisible victories. Years later, Evan would receive a routine audit packet flagged for cursory approval. Inside it was a list of newly reviewed profiles. One name caught his eye, a woman, mid-30s, infrastructure analyst, filed an internal concern about data manipulation. Evan stared at the screen for a long time. Then he adjusted the sequencing. Just milliseconds. Enough to buy time. Enough to keep her visible. Because the system didn't need heroes. It needed friction. And Evan Adler had learned the most dangerous truth of all. The system couldn't be beaten from the outside. Only inhabited. Only redirected. Only made slightly more expensive to be cruel. And somewhere in a quiet facility that did not officially exist, his brother remained alive. Not because the system had found compassion, but because one man had learned how to weaponize its fear of inefficiency. That was the victory, and that was the price.